There have been a number of songs and artists that are so intertwined with internet meme culture that at a certain point they stop feeling real. People who are tied to their jokes so tightly that they're only ever associated with the meme, while the rest of their normal history as musicians gets ignored. One of the most infamously memed musical artists is a band that can be called to mind with a single word that I never even have to say at this point, and have been in the shadow of their internet punchline for over 2 decades. Smash Mouth is a band that we all recognize, but not many people know. They were a staple of early 2000s pop rock, but despite the massive hits under their belt and their continuing presence in pop culture, they aren't remembered either particularly favorably or at great detail in most cases. They're either associated with mid-2010s internet culture, late 90s nostalgia, or early 2020s public backlash, so plenty of detail is bound to fall through the cracks. So today we'll be looking into the impressive rise of Smash Mouth and their unexpected fall from grace. In the beginning of the 90s, proud San Josean and musical newcomer Steve Harwell became inspired by his love of artists like Chuck D and Public Enemy and formed a rap group called Freedom of Speech, or FOS. This group would record their first and only song soon after, titled Big Black Boots. The song became a fan favorite with local radio stations, and its popularity caught the attention of Scotty Brothers Records, who quickly gave Harwell his first record deal. But in 1993, right around when Big Black Boots was officially released by the label, Harwell was already becoming disenfranchised with the life of an up-and-coming hip-hop artist. At this time, albums like Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style and Dr. Dre's The Chronic were releasing, and redefining what mainstream audiences wanted from hip-hop. And more personally to Harwell, he had been shaken by the business environment that underground rap artists had to endure at the time, with him witnessing concerning events on a regular basis at the Scotty Brothers offices, like an A&R guy allegedly getting kidnapped outside the building. The turning point came when, at a radio event while watching a performance by MC Hammer, Harwell turned to his manager and said, "I'm tired of all this hip-hop shit. I want to start a rock band." There would be some pushback, but Harwell was set in his choice, so they decided to find other musicians to recruit for the new band shortly after. Harwell was introduced to guitarist Greg Camp and bassist Paul DeListley, who were both part of another underground band, Lackadaddy, and he himself would recruit a freelance percussionist and longtime friend named Kevin Coleman as the group's drummer. And so, in 1994, the band Smash Mouth was officially formed and began recording their first demos. The band had no record deal at this point and had yet to release any music officially, but Harwell was still catching the attention of radio stations. In particular, the band had befriended a then small-time radio DJ named Carson Daly, who had begun playing demos of their upcoming first album on the station he was hosting in April of 1996. The first song to be played was Nervous in the Alley, which got a reasonably warm reception, but would quickly be outshined by the second song, Walkin On The Sun. So don't delay, act now, supplies will run. This song, written by Greg Camp years before for Lackadaddy, was originally created in response to the murder of Rodney King on March 3, 1991, and the subsequent 1992 LA riots. The song went through several iterations before being recorded for the band, originally considered to be more of a rap song to fit in with Lackadaddy's hip-hop-infused rock style, and instrumentally leaning a lot more heavily into its beach rock sound, with Camp comparing the original demo version to the band Santana. Walkin On The Sun began spreading rapidly through California's radio stations, leading to several record labels immediately discussing deals with the band. Smash Mouth would sign with Interscope Records in June of 1997 and released Walkin On The Sun as their first single shortly after. The song became a smash hit, pun intended, with it peaking at number 2 on the US Top 40 charts and number 1 on both the Airplay and Modern Rock charts. Though the song was ineligible to be on the Hot 100, its airplay alone was enough to solidify it as a hit. In fact, with how much airplay the song got, it was beginning to suffer a level of overplay with listeners, leading one reviewer to comment, "It's jingly jangly American guitar music and Radio 1 are playing it to death. It'll be massive, then they'll disappear." And a month later, on July 8th, 1997, Smash Mouth's debut album Fush Yu Mang was officially released to the public. Despite Walkin On The Sun being their biggest hit at this point and the song most associated with this album, it's actually an outlier from the rest of the record sound-wise. The whole of the album album is mainly standard pop rock and ska punk for the time. Walkin On The Sun is obviously the best song on the album and the best choice for the lead single, since it's the most accessible song from the album for the general ska-deficient public. With that being said, outside of the inherent goofiness that comes from the genre, all the other tracks are solid typical ska experiences. The album closes with the band's first of many covers of oldies classics, with them performing a fairly effective version of War's Why Can't We Be Friends. With the success of Walkin On The Sun, as well as a minor boost from this cover, Fush Yu Mang sold over 2 million copies, with critics considering the album an average ska record which occasionally shines in its writing and only has one standout track of quality. Many people labeled Smash Mouth a one-hit wonder at the time, since their debut album was basically carried commercially by their singular hit, with nothing else experiencing the same success. But more fortunately for Smash Mouth, this meant it was very easy to tell what audiences wanted out of the band. If the people wanted more laid-back, subtly introspective pop rock, then they would need to lean into that sound for their next project. I get knocked down! Flesh out the success of Fush Yu Mang, and now with a new target sound, Smash Mouth wasted no time working on the follow-up album. Before its release, Harwell described the album as finally a real Smash Mouth record, where we all love the way it's going, we love the style of the songs, it really feels like we found our mark, we definitely know what we'd like to sound like now. The band showed a glimpse of this new style on June 9th, 1998, with the release of a cover of the Four Seasons' Can't Get Enough of You Baby from the soundtrack to the movie Can't Hardly Wait. I can't get enough of you, baby. Yes, it's true. Unlike Why Can't We Be Friends, which stuck closely to their ska punk roots, Can't Get Enough of You was incredibly similar in style to Walkin On The Sun, even reusing a lot of instruments and musical ideas. The cover did get a fairly positive reception by listeners, with the song peaking at number 18 on Billboard's Top 40, but much like with the previous album, the first showcase would be overshadowed by the behemoth of a hit that followed. After an initial first version of their new album was finished recording, they showed the final product to Interscope for approval, but the label would reject this version since they didn't consider any of the tracks good candidates for lead singles. Since the album had already been announced and was set to release a few months later, the band had to write and produce 2 new songs to serve as singles essentially last minute. The main writer for the band, Greg Camp, was given inspiration for these new songs from seeing the success of bands like Sugar Ray and Third Eye Blind around the same time, and for one song in particular, he would attempt to write an anthem for their newly developed fanbase after reading through several pieces of fan mail in which people spoke of relating to the misfit persona of the band. This anthem, titled All-Star, would be released officially on May 4th, 1999, though much like Walkin On The Sun, the band gave copies of the song to radio stations early, so it could begin playing a few weeks before its official release and shortly after the initial announcement of the album. This was mainly a marketing tactic, but it was also due to the band wanting to alleviate the high expectations set on them following the success of the first album, and from them being eager to lose their one-hit wonder label. Lyrically, All-Star is meant to encourage a generally optimistic and confident approach to achieving small successes, with Camp stating he aimed to make, quote, a daily affirmation that life is in general good. Musically, it's also solid, though in a few aspects the time constraints for producing the song are apparent, like when the band revealed that Kevin Coleman was unable to drum on the song, so they had to settle for using their touring drummer and reusing drum samples from older tracks. Despite the song's rushed production and it being the last song made for the album, All-Star would immediately see rapid success, peaking at number 4 on the Hot 100 and eventually being certified 5 times platinum worldwide. The song would also be nominated for Best Pop Performance by a Duo or Group at the 2000s Grammys, and many critics considered it one of the best songs of 1999. And naturally, the commercial success from All-Star would also carry over to their second album, Astro Lounge, once it was released on June 8th, 1999. Astro Lounge definitely succeeds in continuing the laid-back pop rock style from Walkin On The Sun into a full album, and thankfully this time the big hit from the record isn't considered a promising outlier. Though despite the album's genre being more consistent, the band still experiments enough with their production for every song to not just be Walkin On The Sun too. One aspect of their style that stayed the same between albums is their lyricism and personality. Every song still has their signature frat boy beach party philosophy and sense of humor, and even after they completely shifted to a more mainstream sound, Greg Camp's writing didn't seem to have been sacrificed. All of these changes seemingly worked in their favor, as Astro Lounge is to date Smash Mouth's most commercially and critically successful album. It peaked at number 6 on the Billboard Albums charts, went triple platinum in the US, and received consistently positive reviews from publications. The lead single, All-Star, completely overtook Walkin On The Sun as the band's signature song, though we can only tell by how much a little bit later. And the album even avoided the mistake of the last by having a second hit single, with the song Then the Morning Comes peaking at number 11. While Fush Yu Mang was a rocky yet successful introduction, Astro Lounge solidified Smash Mouth's place in the late 90s rock landscape, and fully defined what both audiences and its members expected out of the band in the future.
This is the story of a girl.
The songs from Astro Lounge quickly made themselves at home in the pop culture of the times, with one of the easiest ways of seeing this being certain tracks being used in high-profile movies. They had made a song for a movie soundtrack before, but Smash Mouth truly became icons of the time through the songs being licensed for other media. The most notable from this time being the movie Mystery Men, released in August of 1999, which used All-Star in one of its climactic scenes and would later be used as the main reference for the song's music video. But although it's the start to Smash Mouth crossing over into other media, Mystery Men would ultimately be a financial failure, and the movie All-Star would be the most associated with wouldn't release for a few more years. Although things were looking up, this period would also see the band's first major loss, as shortly after the release of the East Bay Sessions, an album of demo recordings for old and unreleased songs, drummer Kevin Coleman would leave the band due to debilitating back problems. Though the departure was understandable and had a reasonable explanation, this would also be the first of a long-standing trend of the band's lineup being unstable, since this wouldn't be the last time an important member of the band would leave, and often for less amicable reasons. But for now, and once again, the band wasted no time capitalizing on the new album's success. They would enter the studio to record the next record in July of 2000, and in early November they held a contest on their website to give fans a chance to name the upcoming album. Though promising, the results of this contest were underwhelming, since first place happened to be a tie, and both winners had suggested the album be self-titled. In the midst of this album's production, however, another major piece of Smash Mouth history would release, and it's probably the one you've all been anticipating the most.
Oh, Lord.
On May 18th, 2001, the DreamWorks animated film Shrek would be released to theaters. The film is meant as a tongue-in-cheek parody of Disney-style musical stories, which were a dominant force in the animation industry up until that point. And one of the ways it lampoons this style is by replacing those movies' usual orchestral scores with its own pop music-filled soundtrack. During production, the filmmakers used All-Star as placeholder music for the movie's opening credits, and planned to later replace it with an original composition. However, the head of DreamWorks, Jeffrey Katzenberg, was fond of the song's use in the sequence, so the team decided to keep the track in the final version of the movie. Smash Mouth was initially hesitant to allow the song's use in the film, but after negotiations with the studio and watching a test screening of the film, the band became fully on board with the decision. Later into production, Katzenberg suggested that the ending of the movie be reworked into a scene that's more memorable and humorous. This eventually led to the dance party scene at the end of the film, which would in turn become a long-running tradition in animated children's movies. DreamWorks would task Smash Mouth with performing a song to use for this scene, so the band decided to create a cover of the Monkees' I'm a Believer. This was because the lyrics of the original could easily be connected to the movie's concept and themes, most notably the opening line,
I thought love was only true in fairy tales.
The movie Shrek would release to abundant commercial success, and its soundtrack alone was certified 6 times platinum worldwide and would be nominated for both a BAFTA and a Grammy. It would be an understatement to say that Smash Mouth struck a very lucrative partnership with DreamWorks, but only time would tell how much All-Star's inclusion in the movie would impact the band's history. Though news besides Shrek was slow, production on the next album was going smoothly, and fans were still excited to see how Smash Mouth would follow up their hit record. But just as things began to look up for the band, that's when tragedy would unfortunately strike. On July 28, 2001, news broke that Steve Harwell's 6-month-old son Presley had passed away due to complications from lymphocytic leukemia. In light of this, tour dates would be cancelled and the upcoming album was delayed from fall to winter. Internally, Unfortunately, Harwell was heartbroken, but he didn't let this event lower his spirits. He would shortly after create the Presley Scott Research Foundation for Leukemia, a non-profit organization specializing in studying the disease. Though the company would be dissolved by August, it was an incredibly noble venture. The news also didn't sour his pursuit of music, since despite the hardship and delays, the new album was right around the corner. And on November 27th, 2001, that new self-titled third album would raise people's spirits after officially releasing. I describe this album as something you would expect a person at the time excited for a new album from Smash Mouth would enjoy. There aren't many changes to the band's formula, and most of the songs on the record are pretty serviceable Smash Mouth experiences. Although none of these songs particularly had that pun also intended star quality like the singles from previous albums. And speaking personally, while there were songs I enjoyed from this album, since they're similar enough to songs I liked from Astro Lounge, nothing here stuck out in quality as much as any of the deep cuts from that album. Not to say the album is bad per se, but it doesn't necessarily attempt to be any more than just the next Smash Mouth album. This underwhelming feeling seemed to have also been noticed by listeners, as this album didn't receive nearly as high of sales numbers as the previous two. It only got certified gold, and it only peaked at number 48 on the album charts. Pretty alright numbers for a standard album, but in no way comparable to the over 3 million copies sold from Astro Lounge or the 2 million from their debut. The only notoriety this album got was because it included their already successful I'm a Believer cover, and none of the singles besides that got close to the Hot 100. The landscape of rock music, and in turn the listeners' tastes, had begun to change in a more Nickelback and Linkin Park-esque direction, and despite the record's short turnaround, Smash Mouth's 1999 sensibilities just didn't fit in with the times. The self-titled album was far from a spectacular failure, but it did show that there needed to be some change in order for Smash Mouth to get their groove back. And fortunately, since nothing notable happened between projects besides touring and a single released for the soundtrack to Austin Powers Goldmember, they would quickly have a new opportunity to get back on top when they released their next album, Get the Picture, on August 5th, 2003. I'd most likely consider Get the Picture better overall than the self-titled album, and it would probably be a better follow-up to Astro Lounge than it as well, but unfortunately a lot of the songs on this album still have the same issue as the last. In a vacuum, these songs would be more solid additions to the band's discography, but in the landscape of music at the time, they all seem like they're being made because that's all the band has to do, while the rest of popular culture changes around them. If a summer jam from Smash Mouth stood out in 2001 when genres like nu metal and adult alternative were just beginning, in 2003 when these styles are now the norm, they wouldn't even be close to the same. Despite its subjective raising quality, Get the Picture failed to stop the band's downward trajectory. The album as a whole peaked at the very bottom of the album charts, none of its singles got to the Hot 100, and the record sold approximately 10 times less than the already low numbers of the previous. This drop in numbers became so severe that Interscope Records would drop the band shortly after the album's release. And after this point, no main Smash Mouth record would appear on the mainstream album charts, and besides a few singles touching the alternative charts later on, this would be the end of the band's period of commercial success. It's a fairly natural close to the monetary viability of a band like them, but this too didn't damper their spirits, since although the well of popularity may have gone dry, there was still music left to make, and the fans who wanted it were still as loyal as ever. The band would get back on their feet after making their own independent label, Beautiful Bomb Records, and would cautiously continue their output. On August 23, 2005, they would release All-Star Smash Hits, acting both as a greatest hits record and as an official re-release of the band's many movie tie-in singles, as well as being the final scheduled release from their Interscope deal. Then in December, they would release a Christmas covers album titled The Gift of Rock, but all of these would only be side projects to the band starting work on their next full album throughout this year. Titled Old Habits, the album was first announced in early May through the band's website. The band claimed the record was meant as a return to their ska punk roots, with many deliberate references and comparisons to their debut album. They also stated that they expected it to be released by summer of 2005, but in actuality, this album never officially saw the light of day. The most the public ever saw from Old Habits as it was being made was when they performed the lead single Getaway Car as musical guests on Carson Daly's talk show. Songs from the album were were played on tours, and the album had allegedly been in a pseudo-finished state for a while, with members of the band being excited to release it, but there were a few events that would lead to constant delays in the album's release. The story the band tells is that Old Habits was delayed in order for it to fully capitalize off Steve Harwell's appearances on the 6th season of the VH1 reality show The Surreal Life, which was slated for January of 2006 but would be delayed itself to March. During this period, the band would re-enter the studio to rework the album several times, and due to what people assumed to be creative struggles, the album was rescheduled for holiday 2005 and would eventually be silently shelved. However, not all the ideas from this scrapped record were lost, as a few of these songs were re-recorded or remixed and put into their real 5th studio album Summer Girl, which would actually release on September 19th, 2006. First off, I'd like to point out that since this album was released independently by them, it isn't available on any streaming services, so finding a way to listen to it for this video was a bitch. Secondly, despite the concept for the album this eventually turned into, a small minority of the songs are actually throwbacks to the Fush Yu Mang style ska punk era of the band. The ones that are do it decently well, though it's clear from them trying to make songs like this again that they changed their sound for a good reason. And the rest of the album is pretty all-white takes on the typical Smash Mouth song, with a few interesting lyrical concepts or musical ideas sprinkled in, though these were seemingly taking a back seat as time went on. Summer Girl also wasn't able to capitalize on Harwell's role on The Surreal Life either, although the music video for the song Story of My Life was filmed with the cast as part of an episode, which, along with its use in the Shrek the Third soundtrack, may have been what got the song onto Billboard's Adult Top 40 chart. Another single, So Insane, also made it onto this chart around the same time, though the movie it was made for, Zoom, was much less successful than Shrek the Third. These would be an admirable uptake in the band's then low numbers, but it would also be the final time anything they released would be put on any mainstream chart. With the band having no label and being past their prime, this album obviously didn't make much of an impact besides this. But what it did impact was the band's stability, as during and after Summer Girl's production, several frequent and turbulent lineup changes occurred which would persist for the rest of the band's history and would greatly complicate the production of any new music. On Valentine's Day 2006, drummer Michael Urbano unexpectedly left the band due to creative differences. He would be replaced initially by their go-to temporary drummer Mitch Marine, who had previously replaced Kevin Coleman when he left the band. Marine would then be replaced by Jason Sutter, who would in turn also leave in early 2007 to drum in Chris Cornell's backing band. Marine would once again fill the role of drummer and would keep the position for a few years afterwards. Though these were big changes, switching to the drummer wasn't going to necessarily majorly influence the music. But after all of this, the band's most impactful loss of this period would occur, as the main guitarist and writer for over a decade, Greg Camp, would leave the band in summer of 2008. In a 2017 interview with Songfacts, Camp gives more insight into the conditions internally for the band that led him to quit. He says he disapproved of how eager the other members were to commodify the band, such as changing their approach to making songs in order to maximize profits, or allowing the use of their songs in commercials, which he feared would be seen as selling out. And since in most cases it was 1 against 3, he didn't have much negotiating power in these decisions. In reference to DreamWorks asking to use All-Star for Shrek, Camp states, "I was kinda like, well, this is gonna put us into this sort of Disney zone, and we're gonna have to stay there, and we're gonna have to be writing for children and families now. I don't think that we should do that." He also says that after All-Star's meteoric rise in popularity, the label and the band began pressuring him to continue their formula, and to make each new song, quote, really smash-mouthy, and he would have no choice since he was the main songwriter for the band. Eventually, Camp decided he needed to get away from the constant demands from others, and wanted to work on music of his own. So the band gave him an ultimatum, and he inevitably chose to leave and pursue his own solo ventures. One of those ventures was joining the Church of Scientology, but we don't like to talk about that one. Camp would be replaced by guitarist Leroy Miller, who would only stay for a year before a brief return by Camp in 2009, as well as the return of Michael Urbano after Mitch Marine left, but both him and Camp would leave the band for good by 2011, and would be replaced by Marine again and Sean Hurwitz respectively. Hurwitz would stay until 2012 when Mike Klumpus would take his place. Marine would once again leave the band and would finally be replaced by Randy Cook. I've been trying to keep this as concise as possible, and this isn't even the end of the changes, but keep in mind that in the midst of all of this happening, Smash Mouth would still be attempting to, in one way or another, create a new album. They had signed to a new label, 429 Records, in June of 2012, and their first and only album to date on this label, titled Magic, would finally be released on September 4th, 2012. But before we talk about that, I want to take you on a little detour to June 2nd, 2011. That's the day that Twitter comedian John Hendren, going by the apt handle @fart, tweeted out a simple request to Smash Mouth's lead singer. Can I pay the lead guy to eat like 2 dozen eggs for $20? We'll meet you in San Jose. Please reply back if so, I am completely serious. Hendren was admittedly drunk at this time and tweeted this out as a throwaway joke. He didn't expect this one-off tweet to actually go anywhere until another user chimed in and raised an additional $100 for Steve Harwell to eat the eggs. Then more and more Twitter users began showing their support and throwing more and more hypothetical money towards this movement. 2 days later, Hendren would write an article on Something Awful, showcasing the amount of people ready and willing to make this event happen. However, despite the hundreds of thousands of people advocating for Harwell to eat the eggs, the band stayed completely silent on the matter for a surprisingly long time. That was until a venue promoter confronted the band about it after playing a show in his space, when they said they were intentionally trying to ignore the commotion. The promoter was able to convince the band to participate, but Harwell had one condition. If the internet was able to donate over $10,000 to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, then he'd accept the challenge. So in early July, the fundraiser page was created, and money began flowing in, and in a matter of days, they managed to cross $10,000. They were even able to rope in celebrity chef and friend of Harwell's, Guy Fieri, to personally cook the eggs for the event, and in turn he was able to use it as the opening ceremony for a new restaurant he would be running in Dublin, California. And so, since the people had spoken, on October 10th, Smash Mouth lead singer Steve Harwell was finally live-streamed eating eggs. He wasn't able to eat all 24, and he let a few audience members help him in his time of need, but just the excitement at this spectacle finally coming to fruition was all the people truly needed. St. Jude was given over $20,000, Smash Mouth was given a new opportunity to promote Summer Girl, and the internet learned that all they needed to make their dreams come true was just a little bit of widespread cyberbullying of public figures. This would also be the first high-profile example of Smash Mouth being used as an internet punchline, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Alright, tangent over. Now let's talk about Smash Mouth's 6th and final album to date, Magic, which I have a lot more thoughts on than I expected, but not many nice things to say. What I will say is that the band does attempt to change with the times on this record, but not necessarily successfully. The title track lead single is a synth-heavy breakup song with a rap verse, which admittedly would fit in with the 2012 pop landscape.
You can't explain the things she does. It's like we're already breaking up. First you see it, but then you don't, and you ask yourself what the hell she does.
A lot of the songs are a more modern-sounding interpretation of Smash Mouth's standard formula, and sound as much like what pop rock from the time should be as they're able to, but a lot of the ideas that come from that feel less like growth for the band and more like obligation. The only thing that's been noticeably affected by the constant switching of band members is the writing, since this album was being made right as Greg Camp left the band. Instead of the strangely poetic lyrics about a variety of relatable or casual circumstances found on previous records, this album is mostly just surface-level love songs, and when they attempt to branch out of that, it turns very clumsily put together.
Whatever happened to Justin Bieber?
Another part of Camp's interview with Songfacts claims that Steve Harwell was never entirely into the punk or psychedelic rock style the band was used to, being more interested in straight pop and country music, which, since Harwell's the only original member left with major influence on the music, it seems like this album leads more heavily into his interests at the expense of general quality. When the songs aren't painfully dated, they're just your standard Smash Mouth affair, but with the personality and the more interesting lyrical or musical ideas they would have had sorta lost in the shuffle. While previous Smash Mouth albums were repetitive stylistically, at least that style was purposefully trying not to be the standard commercial pop rock for the time. I won't say definitively that without Greg Camp the music fell apart, or that since they got professional songwriters or producers the songs lost their spark, because there were previous songs that weren't written by Camp, and those weren't the best tracks off those albums, but they at least tried to stay true to what people were used to Smash Mouth being. At first glance, Magic was attempting to modernize Smash Mouth, but in actuality, it was trying to force Smash Mouth into a modern pop mold very unconvincingly, and left an unfortunately sour end to the band's commercial output. By this point in Smash Mouth's careers, the band had essentially jumped the shark. They had gone 4 albums in without any major hits or publicity, and they had been mostly relegated to a cultural artifact of that period in between grunge and nu metal. Despite minor upticks in attention from external factors on occasion, the band was only continuing to fade out of public consciousness. Unexpectedly, however, an online phenomenon was beginning to slowly build steam after the release of their last album. Birthed from a seed the band had planted a decade prior. In mid to late 2012, an ironic fandom for the character Shrek was quickly spreading across the internet, and with Smash Mouth's involvement in the franchise, this movement would bring new eyes to them as well. Shrek had consistently been an ironic fascination online since the beginning of the 2010s, underlaid by an unironic enjoyment of the first film, as well as the internet's general habit of mockingly perverting previously wholesome or respected media properties. Similarly, parodies of All-Star had existed since at least 2009, but the song's popularity in internet culture wasn't truly cemented and partially separated from Shrek until early 2014 to late 2017, when remix and meme culture in general saw its mainstream cultural peak. April 27th, 2014 saw the start of Neil Cicierega's Mouth series of remix albums, which conceptually center around the song and late 90s nostalgia as a whole, and through Cicierega's influence on mashup culture is seen by many as the beginning of All-Star's online prominence. The song's use in replacement remixes, a trend started in 2016 through memes like the Nut Shack and We Are Number One, further prolonged All-Star's relevance as a meme, and eventually the song became so prevalent for so long that the internet adopted it as its newest collectively held eternal running joke. Smash Mouth was initially confused by All-Star's online popularity, but would eventually start warming up to the internet's newfound appreciation for the song, while also offhandedly noting that the song's sales had seen steady resurgence throughout this time. All-Star had always been the song they were most well known for, so despite them having trouble understanding online meme culture at first, they had no issue accepting that All-Star memes were becoming their new legacy. The band would begin actively encouraging remixes and memes of All-Star, and they even began friendly correspondence with some of the more popular meme creators, like cover artist John Sudano and replacement remixer James Nielsen. While this new wave of attention wouldn't be able to bring the band to their former glory, it was easily able to give the group a new lease on life, and was introducing Smash Mouth to a new generation better than the band ever could on their own. Although bass player Paul Delisle argues that a majority of their audience is unaware of their meme status and genuinely support the band for being fans of their music. Whatever the case may be, this new wave of online attention gave Smash Mouth the chance to continue in the public eye, which would later become both a blessing and a curse. But of course, these events would only occur over the span of several years, and in between these, the band wasn't completely devoid of activity, even if news and releases were still scarce. In general, the bulk of Smash Mouth's history past Magic would be them appearing on various tours to capitalize off All-Star's reappraisal, and releases from them would slow considerably because of this, though other news from the band would come sporadically. The still continuing lineup changes would come to a close when Randy Cook left the band in late 2012, being replaced at first by Charlie Paxson and then by returning Jason Sutter, who would keep the role until late 2015 when Randy Cook would permanently return as the band's drummer. This wouldn't be the final shift in the band's lineup, but after Cook returned, they saw a long period of stability in this regard. In January of 2013, the band would release a cookbook through their Guy Fieri connection titled Recipes from the Road, which contained easy recipes as well as photos and stories from the band's touring history. In May of that same year, the band would released their first song since their latest album, a Mother's Day tribute song titled Mama Don't You Worry, though since it was an iTunes exclusive, it didn't gain much traction. Overall, whenever a new release from the band came, it didn't come with much widespread fanfare, even with their newfound internet attention. In actuality, the real headlines being made by the band would come from more unfortunate and unflattering circumstances. On June 14th, 2015, in the midst of a performance during a food festival in Colorado, audience members began throwing pieces of bread in the air, presumably as harmless celebration of the festivities. A few of these stray pieces were being thrown on stage and at band members, however, and as this continued for a large portion of the show, at one point Steve Harwell had enough and began a profanity-filled rant at the audience. Those at the event, and even the others on stage, realized the ridiculousness of the situation, as the band chose to facetiously play the beginning of All-Star in the background of Harwell's ranting.
You bring your ass on stage, you ever throw shit at me, I will tell you right now, I will beat the fuck out of you, okay?
This outburst would quickly be picked up by gossip sites like TMZ and Gawker, and Smash Mouth became embroiled in controversy and ridicule because of it. Harwell would apologize for this incident a month later, but this would do little to quell the mockery. As the festival's organizers stated after it became a story, it wasn't like anyone was going to get hurt by throwing bread up in the air. We just had to laugh at it, because he just really made a fool out of himself. This would be the first incident involving Harwell's behavior at concerts that would be widely publicized by the media, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Fortunately, despite this hit to their reputation, the band soldiered on, though with more stories like this occurring in the future, it was still unclear how long it would be before Harwell's behavior would catch up to him. In May of 2016, the band would release their first live album titled The Very Best of Smash Mouth, and in August of 2016, Smash Mouth would collaborate with electronic dance artist Spectre and release the song Love is a Soldier. This single did get a small amount of attention, as the idea of Smash Mouth performing on an EDM song confused many critics, especially since the genre's presence in popular music had died out well before 2016. The most interesting event to come from the band in 2017 was when they got into a legitimate feud with the Oakland Athletics baseball team Twitter account in late October. It would only last a day and apologies were quickly issued afterwards, but it was still amusing to see. Though also in 2017, it would be announced that an acoustic version of their debut album Fush Yu Mang was being recorded, along with a pledge music campaign being created filled with rewards like signed memorabilia and chances to meet the band while on tour. This acoustic re-recording of their debut album would release on June 29th, 2018, which would feature a surprise short-lived return from both Greg Camp and Michael Urbano. November of 2018 would then see the return of headlines about occurrences during Smash Mouth concerts, though these stories would be less amusing than the public might have expected. On November 11th, 2018, Smash Mouth was performing a set during a music festival in Queensland, Australia. 2 songs into the show, Steve Harwell became visibly ill and was forced to be absent for the rest of the performance. The day after, he would be examined by paramedics and seemed to be making a quick recovery, though he was still in an unfit condition to perform at the time. It's unclear what exactly made Harwell ill during this festival, but this day would be a shockingly blunt sign to audiences that the aging singer's health was beginning to get the best of him. Unbeknownst to the general public, Harwell had been diagnosed with both cardiomyopathy and Wernicke encephalopathy in 2013. The former gave him regular bouts of heart failure, and the latter was severely detrimental to his motor functions and regular speech, and is commonly diagnosed in chronic alcoholics. Harwell's health had affected performances in the past, such as in August of 2016 when he collapsed in the middle of a show and had to be rushed off-site in an ambulance. It was also never stated specifically what caused that incident either, but if the singer's history of health issues is any indication, this was beginning to become a harmful pattern. But with the 2020s right around the corner, the health of Smash Mouth's lead singer would be the least of the public's worries. As the COVID-19 pandemic began to spread across America in early 2020, several venues and events were understandably closed in order to mitigate the virus's spread. Some events, however, either refused to or were unable to close for whatever reason. One of these events would be the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally in South Dakota. The city of Sturgis was unable to fully cancel the event, and any attempt to regulate visitors' behavior in order to avoid potential spread of the virus was either ignored or mishandled, and travel restrictions didn't lower the number of attendees, leading to over 460,000 people being present, and with a large percentage of them ignoring social distancing guidelines and refusing to wear masks. One of the musical guests at this event would be Smash Mouth, and a video was later posted of their performance where Steve Harwell began saying things like "fuck that COVID shit" and "now we're all here together tonight and we're being human once again." Many media outlets interpreted these statements as Harwell agreeing with the audience's mindset, and the backlash to this performance was immediate and intense. And with this gathering eventually being evaluated as a potential COVID super spreader event, the band was in even more hot water. This situation brought a lot of negative attention towards Steve Harwell, with this instance being compounded onto the other stories of his behavior behavior during performances, which continued to become news every once in a while. Harwell was quickly cemented as a contentious figure, so opinions were mixed among the public when we eventually found out he didn't have much time left with the band. In May of 2021, Smash Mouth would be involved in yet another electronica collaboration, this time singing on the Timmy Trumpet song Camelot. Though seemingly innocuous, this song would turn out to be the band's final release before their latest major loss. On October 10th, 2021, a TikTok was posted containing a compilation of clips of Smash Mouth performing at a beer and wine festival in New York. The clip showed Harwell, clearly very intoxicated, slurring his speech and intentionally doing and saying offensive things, including threatening to assault an audience member and giving the Nazi salute. This event was most likely the lowest anyone had seen Harwell at any performance, and it unfortunately would be the last. 2 days afterwards, TMZ gave an exclusive report that Steve Harwell had decided to finally retire from the band after 25 years, after his age as well as his deteriorating health and emotional stability had finally reached a point where he was unable to perform. This TMZ article would be the first public acknowledgement of the singer's diagnosis, and it painted a bleak picture of his physical and mental state. Harwell had already planned on taking a hiatus from the band before the October incident, and the band had previously been using replacement singers while he was recovering from his health issues. But he would admit that the incident in October was a wake-up call for him. Concluding a statement he gave announcing his retirement, Harwell states, "To our loyal and amazing fans, thank you. All of this was possible because of you. I tried so hard to power through my physical and mental health issues and to play in front of you one last time, but I just wasn't able to. I cannot wait to see what Smash Mouth accomplishes next, and I'm looking forward to counting myself as one of the band's newest fans." In January of 2022, the band announced that they had picked the replacement for Harwell, singer Zach Good, previously of the band Ghoul Spoon, and introduced him to listeners on March 1st with a cover of Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up. Good does a commendable job at filling the role, but Harwell's voice is too iconic for the band to truly be fully replaced.
Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down, never gonna run around and desert you, never gonna make you cry, never gonna say goodbye.
The story of Smash Mouth is one that contains all the key aspects of a compelling narrative, from humble beginnings and a climactic rise in power to a slow yet noticeable fall from grace and the bittersweet send-off to a beloved era. The band was a roller coaster of both cultural influence and musical quality, and although they're mostly seen as punchlines in internet circles nowadays, their peak as late 90s rock staples and their resurgence via mid-2010s meme culture were undeniably spectacles to witness, no matter your opinion on them as artists or people. The history of Smash Mouth was an interesting one to catalog, and I honestly didn't expect to be as invested as I was while making this video. The prospect of taking a band like them seriously is one that I and most others never really entertained, but even though their period as unironic cultural juggernauts was long ago and retrospectively short-lived, I was still able to personally gain a bit of respect for them as musicians throughout this project. Or at least enough respect to be disappointed when they stumble and to be optimistic and curious as to where the band is heading in the future. It's definitely impossible now for Smash Mouth to have the same success they once had 2 decades ago, but no matter the hardships the band may face, they can rest easy knowing that their legacy will live on in the everlasting online pastime of shitposting. But speaking personally, this kind of project definitely brings a new perspective on a type of artist that most other people don't think about outside of their comedic value. Most people would have just laughed at the ridiculousness of their lyrics and maybe brought up the egg thing before moving on, but the idea of taking in the entire serious history of an artist that is basically only seen as a punchline in the internet's eyes is a perspective that I think should still be recognized, because lest we forget, at one point, even though it was a long time ago, these people were taken seriously. But that's probably enough of me being pretentious about the Shrek band, so thank you for watching this deep dive into Smash Mouth. Be sure to like the video because I told you to, and be sure to subscribe because your mom told you to, and you want her to love you, don't you? And I'll see you all in the next video.